Measure the body and pass it on, Ma Xian reappears. A disciple of the Ma family, measuring good fortune and avoiding evil, please wave the Immortal Flag and send the Immortal Seal to execute all the evil spirits. I am a person who died for 3 days and then came back to life again. From then on, I have experienced some unknown stories. Chapter 1. Entanglement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I am a resurrected person who was brought back from the underworld after 3 days of death. Speaking of this matter, I have to mention my grandmother. Grandma appears to be an ordinary rural old lady, constantly busy in front of the stove all day. However, he has another identity, being a disciple on horseback. When it comes to being a horse immortal, many people's first impression is of holding a divine gong, beating it while dancing and dancing. Actually, that's just a part. Many disciples who have come out of the horse immortal will not do those things at all. As long as they have a clear understanding with the immortal family, they can communicate with them and even invite them to help solve some problems that human resources cannot solve. The North Horse, in the commonly referred to South Mao Bay Horse, refers to this horse immortal. The rolling torrent has been flowing for thousands of years, and Mao Shan Gate has already established a deep-rooted position in the south, with a great reputation. And this, Baima, can be on par with Nan Mao, indicating that it is not as simple as it appears on the surface. It is said that the origin of the horse immortal originated from shamans a long time ago. Later it was also known as the Great Witch. They all use their own bodies as a medium to invite some immortal families to treat illnesses and disasters for others, even in addition to some evil things on their bodies or at home. And most of the disciples who come out of the horse worship the 5 immortals. They are fox, yellow, white, willow, and gray. That's the fox, weasel, hedgehog, snake, and mouse. These 5 immortal families each perform their respective duties and possess their own abilities. Among them, the fox immortal holds the upright position, can ensure peace, does not ascend to filth in the house, and enters and exits safely. Huang Xian controls, can control the spirit and emotions of others, in a sense, can control people's consciousness and behavior. Bai Xian treats illness, takes medicine from afar, saves lives and helps the injured. Lu Xian drives away evil spirits, subdues demons. Upright and unyielding, the gray immortal brings wealth and also has the ability to predict the future. It can be said that the 5 immortals gathered in the hall, each performing their own duties and displaying their divine abilities. Grandma is the most famous disciple of the horse immortal within a radius of 10 miles. Because her surname is he and she is the second in the family, people around her will respectfully call her he ergu. How strong is Grandma's ability? Let's put it this way, whether it's the inner spirit and outer immortals, feng shui treatment, or shameless troublemakers, as long as Grandma arrives, she will immediately handle it. However, such a powerful figure almost lost his life because of me, and in the end, he collapsed. That was when I was just over 2 months old. One night, I didn't know what had happened and suddenly started crying. And the more I cry, the more I cry. No matter how my mom tries, she just can't stop. Even one after another, without ventilation. Quickly, because there was more air coming out and less air coming in, my small face had also turned pale. The beads in both eyes began to roll upwards. I can only keep my mouth open, but I can't make a single sound. Seeing this situation, my parents were really scared. They hugged me and prepared to run outside, intending to go to the hospital quickly to see the situation. Before leaving the house, the grandmother who lived in the neighboring yard ran in. The first thing she said when she came in was, "What's wrong with my grandson?" Old Tang Xian gave me a dream and said something happened to my grandson. As soon as I spoke, my grandmother saw what I looked like. First, I was startled, then without saying a word, I raised my hand and patted my forehead, which was quite a light blow. With just a snap, a few finger marks appeared on my forehead. My father was already anxious in his heart, but when he saw his grandmother make such a move, he felt a little unhappy. He was about to speak, but my grandmother scolded me fiercely. What kind of person doesn't have eyes? Dare to provoke our grandson. Aren't you afraid that your second aunt will invite you to the Immortal family to tear you apart? Grandma just finished cursing. A strange scene happened. I, who had already been quiet, suddenly burst into tears with a wow sound. At the same time, breathing was also unobstructed. At this moment, the already bruised face slowly returned to normal. However, my eyes were still flipping upwards, unwilling to fall. Seeing this, my grandmother frowned and snatched me away, laying me flat on the con. She then turned her head and instructed my grandfather to bring in a bowl of water and a pair of chopsticks. She wants to ask me what exactly is on me. What does it mean to suddenly come into my house and make a fuss at night? My parents knew about my grandmother's abilities, and when they saw her like this, they didn't dare to talk too much. They could only stand on the side with an anxious face. They understand in their hearts that I should be entangled by something now. This is not a real illness, even going to the hospital cannot solve the problem. Quickly, Grandpa brought in the bowls and chopsticks from outside. Grandma placed the small bowl in front of her and murmured to herself, "What are the conditions? We can see clearly on the chopstick heads, and we have some pleasant words about the good and bad times. The child is still young and cannot withstand turmoil. Let's prioritize harmony, and don't hurt it. Otherwise, our old immortal wouldn't be eating dry rice either." As he spoke, he inserted a pair of chopsticks into the water. The chopsticks had just entered the water when a clear crack appeared from top to bottom. Then it exploded with a loud bang. At the same time, the small bowl in front of me was also shattered. Suddenly, all the water in the bowl splashed out, spilling all over my grandmother and mother. This is the other party's clear unwillingness to negotiate. Faced with this situation, Grandma also felt a bit nervous. She told her family that this thing that came tonight was not simple, and it came for my life. Maybe I'll be taken away tonight. Upon hearing this, my mother was already scared to tears, and my father was not much better either. He was so anxious that he stomped his feet. Grandma hesitated for a while, then asked Grandpa and my dad to stand in front of the door with their sharp tools and guard. "No matter who comes to our house tonight, we cannot let him in. You can roughen up if necessary. Once someone comes in, I'm afraid I'll have an accident." Upon hearing this, my grandfather and father were not hesitant, one carrying a kitchen knife and the other carrying an axe, and walked out, firmly guarding the door. Then, my grandmother asked my mother to hold me in her arms and keep calling my nickname. This is to prevent my soul from leaving my body. After explaining these things, Grandma stopped talking and turned around to light 3 incense sticks and 2 candles on the Immortal Hall. Then she knelt on the ground and kept muttering something to the Immortal Hall. My mother was really scared at that time. Although I knew my dad and Grandpa were standing behind the door, my grandmother was right in front of me. However, she still couldn't control the fear in her heart, trembling all over her body. Even when shouting my name, it was intermittent. And my crying voice at that time was different from before. In my mother's words, that was no longer like a child's crying, but more like the heart-wrenching howls of some wild beast. The listeners' hair stood on end, and their back kept emitting a cold breath as they listened. Chapter 2. Old Immortals Save Their Lives. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That night's experience can be said to be extremely terrifying, to the extent that when my mother told me this story later, she still had a lingering feeling of fear. Just that night, when everyone was highly nervous, our house suddenly had a power outage. The whole room instantly darkened. Only the 2 candles on the Immortal Hall were still flickering slightly, reflecting the shadows of the furniture in the room, constantly waving their teeth and claws. This has added some indescribable fears. My mother held me in her arms, her back tightly against the wall, and she curled up like this. Grandma didn't make any moves and continued to kneel in front of the Immortal Hall, talking incessantly. Gradually, the furniture inside the room began to shake violently, making a clanging sound. The immortal hall in front of Grandma remained motionless. Even the candles above were completely unaffected. My mother looked at the furniture around her in terror, and now she's already scared out of her wits. At this moment, suddenly, with a loud bang, it seemed like something had crashed into the window from outside. My mother trembled all over and quickly turned her head to look out the window. But as a result, I didn't see anything. The entire courtyard was pitch black with no light. In the sky, there is a bright moonlight, but it seems to be blocked by something. No matter what, it can't penetrate a minute. My mother didn't dare to look outside anymore, instead she turned her head back. Unexpectedly, my gaze swept over my face. Just this one moment, my mother couldn't help but scream. I don't know when it started, what I cried was no longer tears, but the black and red blood. And at this moment, 2 lines of blood and tears have already hung on my face. My mother said that if it weren't me in her arms at the time, he would have used all his strength to throw me out. After hearing my mother's scream, my grandmother finally had a reaction. She suddenly stood up from the ground and turned her head to the window, shouting loudly, "My whole house of immortals has already arrived. Can't you give us face?" Grandma had a reaction, which was supposed to be a good thing, but the sound she was making at the moment was something that an old man should have. It's strange to say that just as Grandma spoke, the furniture in the room stopped moving and the lights lit up on their own. Everything has returned to normal. Grandma came to me and first reached out to touch my face, then shook her head before speaking. "Your child is a golden boy from the South China Sea, a godsend from heaven. He is on a mission in heaven, and this time the underworld has come to help bring him back. With such a large stature, he cannot stay in the mortal world. Even us, we cannot go against the sky." As she spoke, she shook her body and spoke again, "Immortal, I am just such a grandson. Anyway, I need to help our family find a way to take him away. We can't just let him be taken away like this." This time it was Grandma's voice speaking. There is a hint of pleading in the tone. Her body trembled and she spoke in the old man's voice again, "Even if we took action, we managed to keep him tonight. But his fate is here. Nanhai Jintong usually doesn't live to be 6 years old, so why do you need to?" After saying these words, he began to stand alone and mutter, speaking very quickly. My mother knows that this must be my grandmother communicating with those immortal families, so she doesn't dare to disturb them. After a while, the old man's voice came out again. "Ah, all right. Our disciple is usually respectful and has been divided into books for so many years. Today, we rarely asked for our help. We also helped her. I just don't know if the person in charge of this place will agree." He said to my mother again, "You don't have to hold him like this anymore. With me here, he won't be fine. You should go to the front of the immortal hall and grab some incense ash, stir it with warm water, and give this little boy a drink. I hope you can help." After hearing these words, my mother didn't dare to slack off and quickly laid me flat on the con. I quickly got a cup of warm water and sprinkled some incense ash inside. I just stirred it a few times and then fed it to me bit by bit. As I drank this bowl of water, I didn't cry or make a fuss, so I fell asleep in a daze. Seeing this situation, my mother finally breathed a sigh of relief. I am grateful to the old fairy on my grandmother. Grandma nodded and said, "All right, since it's okay, I'll go back too. You child." At this point, she paused for a moment, then sighed and shook her whole body. Grandma's voice came out again. "These old immortal families." After saying these words, Grandma looked at me. After confirming that I was okay, I also breathed a deep sigh of relief. Tonight can be considered a tough night. Just as the big stone in the hearts of my grandmother and my mother was about to be put down, the door was knocked open from outside with a loud bang. The sudden sound startled both my grandmother and my mother. When they turned their heads to look, they saw at a glance that my dad had already walked in from outside. Grandma said somewhat displeased, "Didn't you stay outside to guard?" What did you come in for? And there was such a big commotion. Are you going to demolish the house? My dad didn't say anything, but walked straight towards me. My mother didn't think much, she just thought he was concerned about my situation and needed to take a quick look to feel at ease. After all, I am his only biological son. The experienced grandmother discovered something wrong at this moment. In his opinion, my father's face was expressionless at this moment, his eyes were straight, and he was biting his teeth tightly with a fierce expression. It's like competing with someone again. Seeing him like this, my grandmother's heart tightened and she quickly called out my father's name outside. And something unexpected happened. Right outside the door, my father's voice came out. What's wrong? Mom. Is the child okay? With just one answer, my grandmother and mother were all struck by lightning. If my dad were outside, who would be the person in front of me? Before the two of them could think it over, the person had already raised their hand and grabbed me by the neck. My mother was shocked and pale. At this moment, she didn't have to be afraid. Her maternal nature made her brave. She hugged me and turned around, fiercely pressing her shoulder against the person's chest. That person, although as robust as my father, was unexpectedly pushed back 2 steps by my mother. At the same time, my mother also shouted at my grandmother, "Mom, come up with a solution." Actually, there's no need for my mom to say much at this time. Grandma has already taken action. She grabbed a handful of incense ash from the incense burner and slammed it fiercely on the person's doorstep. The person let out a scream, and the whole person turned into paper dust in front of my grandmother and mother. It wasn't until then that Grandma and the others realized that the person in the photo was clearly a paper figure, a moving paper figure. And just as the paper figure had just turned into paper dust, I suddenly let out a big mouthful of black blood with a "wow" sound, and my whole body was instantly motionless, icy cold all over. Seeing me like this, my mother's expression froze and she lifted her head to call out to her grandmother, "Mom, the child seems dead." Chapter 3. Introduction to Fairy Visits. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After listening to my mother's words, my grandfather and father rushed in from outside, and the first thing they saw was that I was already silent. My dad was so anxious that tears kept flowing out, but there was nothing he could do. Grandpa was also stamping his feet anxiously on the side. Grandma appeared particularly calm at this moment. He told a few people at home not to panic and gave her some time to discuss with the Immortals. Then, 3 incense sticks were lit and prepared to be inserted into the incense burner. But I don't know what's going on, these 3 incense sticks just can't fit into the incense burner. Sometimes, even though it has already been inserted, it will inexplicably pop out. Seeing this, Grandma also has no choice. She pleaded with the Immortal Hall and said, "I'm just such a grandson. Do I have to watch her suffer? I know you don't want to meddle in this matter, and I won't make things difficult for you." As she spoke, Grandma stood up from the ground and lifted her hand to remove the memorial tablet enshrined in the Immortal Hall. She spoke again, "Anyway, this time I will give my grandson back. Even if I have to pay for it, I am willing. If I am fortunate enough to come back this time, I will continue to offer sacrifices to all the immortal families. On the contrary, if I can't come back, then we can get together today. Go find another disciple. Our fate has come to an end here." Speaking, he found a brazier and without hesitation, set fire to the supply table. Then, he knelt in front of the brazier and said to his grandfather, "I don't know if I can come back again after I go. I have 3 days of chance. If the rooster crows in 3 days and I haven't returned yet, you can find a place to bury me and my grandson together. I can also be his companion in the underworld." Grandma's voice was unusually hoarse when she said these words, as if she had suddenly aged more than 10 years. My family was naturally very sad, and my mother couldn't bear to let my grandmother do this. She planned to help her up from the ground. But with just such a touch, I immediately realized that my grandmother had lost her breath and her body had stiffened. The people at home know that this is because my grandmother went to hell. The so-called wandering Yin refers to the temporary departure of the soul from the body to help others do something. For example, things like soul attraction. Grandma has been kneeling for 3 days. The other members of the family are also eagerly waiting for the results. As time passed, the hearts of the family began to gradually sink. Until the early morning 3 days later, my grandmother and I remained motionless. My mother couldn't bear it anymore and knelt beside her grandmother, crying. Her crying drove my father and grandfather to burst into tears as well. At this moment, a loud rooster crow spread throughout the entire village. The rooster sings the world white. With this rooster crow, the sky can be considered truly bright. But my grandmother and I still have no signs of regaining consciousness. This is undoubtedly a huge blow for the family. Just as the whole family was immersed in boundless sorrow, I, who was originally lying on the Kong without any rest, suddenly burst into tears with a wow sound. The whole family was stunned and didn't react, just staring straight at me. At this moment, Grandma also took a long breath, stretched lazily, and stood up from the ground. Seeing my grandmother and I wake up at the same time, everyone in the family is overjoyed. Grandma told them that this was when the old immortals of her family came to their aid at the most critical moment. Otherwise, it doesn't have to be me, even my grandmother would have to risk this life. In order to express gratitude to the immortals, my grandmother asked someone to write a new memorial form and paste it on the immortal hall. He respectfully presented the great sacrifice for 7,749 days. We have everything from chicken, duck, fish, and meat. Although I escaped a disaster this time, the old fairy had also said before that I was a South China Sea golden boy and could not live to be 6 years old. After much thought, my grandmother even wrote my name on the confession form. The meaning is to make me closer and closer to the immortal family. Once we encounter danger, the immortal family will not sit idly by and stand idly by. Grandma's approach can be said to be unparalleled. Even her fairy was startled by her grandmother's actions. However, Grandma insists on doing so, and no one can do anything about it. It is precisely because of my grandmother's approach that we have formed an inseparable bond. So much so that 2 years later, they finally found me. This time I was not entangled by anything, but experienced even more bizarre things. Just like last time, during the day, I was in the same condition as usual and had nothing to do. But just as it was getting dark outside, I stood up straight from the Kong and began to sneer at my grandmother's immortal hall. My father, who is so big and rough, couldn't help but stand on his head with a smile. My mother is not sure what exactly happened to me, so she plans to pick me up. But I found out that at this moment, my feet seemed to have taken root, and I couldn't even hold them up. Faced with this situation, my mother quickly called my grandmother into the room. Grandma first looked at me up and down. I couldn't help but exclaim, then mutter to myself, judging from Xiaoqian's appearance, it seems that the immortal family has possessed him. However, at his young age, he doesn't even know how to speak, so how could the immortal family come to find him? Doubts turned to doubts, and my grandmother politely asked me, I don't know which way the immortal family is coming. Can you give me your name first? I'm also ready to ask for a magic pen to write down the name of the old immortal. After listening to my grandmother's words, I, who is only over 2 years old, actually spoke up. Moreover, it was the voice of a middle-aged man who said, You are a great disciple. My name is Lu Santai, and I remember that name. I will come back often in the future. As soon as I finished speaking, my whole body softened and I collapsed into my mother's arms. Grandma quickly found a notebook and jotted down the name of the immortal family she had just registered for. However, before she could put down her pen, I started crying again, singing some incomprehensible tunes while crying. Seeing me like this, my grandmother's expression became a bit nervous. What's going on here? Why is there still an immortal family on Xiaoqian's body? Speaking, Grandma asked the name of the Immortal family again, just like before. And after I registered, I fell asleep again. But after a moment, he sat up again and began to mutter in his mouth. The speaking speed is very fast, and it doesn't even seem like one person is talking, giving the impression that there is a large group of people chatting here. Grandma was also panicked at this moment. She didn't expect that I still had a fairy family on me. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, how many immortal families have come to Xiaoqian's body? Upon hearing my grandmother's question, my eyes widened and I stared straight at her. In an extremely majestic voice, I loudly said to her, the 70.2 guiding immortals have all returned to their positions. Why don't you hurry up and burn incense for this young disciple? Chapter 4. Onsite Troubles. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A short sentence left the whole family standing on the spot, without any reaction for a long time. 72 guiding immortals. What is this concept? There is only one immortal family that can be possessed by others at once, but more than 70 people suddenly appeared on me, which is simply unheard of. After pondering for a moment, my grandmother tentatively asked me, our Xiaoqian is still young. I'm afraid he can't bear it if you come here like this. Listening to Grandma's words, Lu Santai's voice came out once again. We came here this time because this little boy has a strong immortal relationship. His future abilities must be limitless. It can be said that he is the leader of the 100 immortals and cultivates together with the other immortals. This time, I just brought some guiding immortals, and the real suppressing immortals have not arrived yet. Your grandson, who will be the assistant of the 100 immortals in the future, is definitely not easy. You, the old lady, should not delay him. Since we are here, we cannot go back. Grandma had no choice but to open a new memorial form and list all the names of the immortals who came this time. Write it on. Although there have been so many guiding fairies this time, there is nothing special about me. I am still growing up slowly like other children. Sometimes, I just keep smiling in the air by myself, as if there's something out there that others can't see intentionally teasing me. At the beginning, my parents were a bit scared. My grandmother told them that it was those immortal families who liked me and were making me happy. They are all staying by my side to protect me thoroughly. In a blink of time, I am already over 6 years old. As the old fairy from my grandmother's family said before, I am Hai Jintongming and I won't live to be 6 years old. I was able to survive now thanks entirely to the old immortal of my grandmother's family and the 70.2 guiding immortals on my body. However, the will of heaven cannot be violated, even immortals are the same. Although they saved my life, my physical condition is very weak, and I look much thinner than other children. More importantly, over the past few years, I have faced numerous obstacles and occasionally faced life-threatening situations. However, every time we encounter danger, we turn it into a false alarm. Everyone at home knows that it was the immortal families who took action in secret, saving my life time and time again. Everything was originally peaceful, but the appearance of one person once again changed my life. That day, my grandmother, as usual, hugged me and chatted with the old ladies from the same village under the big tree at the entrance of the village. The old lady in the countryside talks about nothing more than trivial neighborhood matters, and she spends a whole day chatting. Just as noon was approaching and everyone was preparing to go home to cook, an unexpected guest arrived in our village. That is an old man in his 60s, dressed in coarse linen clothes, not very good looking, and his figure is relatively thin. However, a pair of eyes is particularly eye-catching. That pair of eyes are very bright, and they are always shining brightly. It's like being able to see the department's heart clearly. I don't know why, but as soon as I saw this old man, I couldn't help but feel a wave of disgust in my heart. I couldn't help but shrink into my grandmother's arms. Seeing an outsider coming, several old ladies stopped talking and all looked at the old man in front of them. The old man ignored the others and went straight to his grandmother, asking, "Are you Aunt He?" Grandma was slightly taken aback, not expecting that the other party would recognize her at once. However, it seemed to have sensed something. First, he looked up and down at the old man before nodding and saying, "It's me. Do you have something to do with me?" Upon hearing this, the old man laughed heartily and then said to his grandmother, "It's not a big deal. It's just that I heard that he Ergu is a well-known disciple of the Immortal Family, and they all have abilities. Coincidentally, I'm also someone with a reputation. Today, I came over to ask he Ergu for advice and see whose Immortal Family is more powerful." Although he said this politely, in reality, he came to find his grandmother to fight against immortality. Grandma smiled faintly and said, "What's so powerful or not? They are all disciples of the Immortal Family who do things to help others. There's nothing like that. That's just a false name." After hearing these words, the old man became even more arrogant and sneered, and he dare not compare. I'm afraid those previous reputations were all scammed out by some means, right? Chapter 5. Fighting Immortals. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As the whirlwind in front of my grandmother rushed into the yard, the whole yard immediately became a raging wind, even accompanied by chilling winds. The yard is also filled with flying sand and rocks. It's really scary. This situation only lasted for about 10 minutes before Grandma suddenly opened her eyes and coughed violently. At the same time, the candlelight on the Immortal Hall behind him also dimmed a lot. It goes without saying that my grandmother failed this battle against Immortals. Grandma looked out the window and said in a low voice, "No wonder he behaves so recklessly. It turns out he worships a wolf fairy." The wolf immortal is not among the 5 great immortals, and is collectively referred to as the wild immortal along with other cultivators who have become immortals. At this moment, another whirlwind appeared in front of Grandma, spinning around her non-stop. Grandma looked at the whirlwind and sighed, saying, "Okay, since you want to go out and give it a try, then go." After saying these words, Grandma closed her eyes again. The whirlwind also rushed out directly, entangled with the strong wind outside. We didn't speak, we were all waiting quietly for the result. More than 10 minutes had passed, and Grandma suddenly trembled violently, then with a pop sound, she spurted out a mouthful of blood. This time, the candles on the Immortal Hall behind her were extinguished directly, and no more Immortal families appeared. We were all startled. Hurriedly, he went over with all his hands and feet to help his grandmother. With this assistance, I found that a large amount of blood was flowing out of one of my grandmother's legs. The crimson blood seeped through the pants' legs and flowed all over the ground. Seeing this, Grandpa quickly pulled open Grandma's pants, and the scene before him was even more shocking. There are a pair of deep blood holes on the belly of my grandmother's leg, surrounded by many dental marks. It's like being bitten hard by some wild beast and tearing down. Seeing my grandmother suffer such a serious injury, my dad couldn't help but get angry. I couldn't care what the other person was, so I cursed loudly and turned around, grabbed a kitchen knife, and rushed out desperately. Grandpa was worried that my dad would suffer, so he quickly followed him out. At this moment, an old man's voice came from outside the yard. "And he of the He family is just like that. Today, this is a lesson for you. I will come back to your village tomorrow, and you must admit in front of the whole village that your immortals are not as good as mine. Tell them that if they want to see things in the future, they will come to my place. Otherwise, I will demolish your Immortal Hall." After saying these words, Do Convenient left in a burst of cold laughter. Seeing the other party being so arrogant, my small fists clenched tightly. I wish I could give him a good lesson now. My grandmother sighed and said, "Unfortunately, the most powerful immortals in my family have suffered a great loss of cultivation because they accompanied me to the underworld to save Xiao Yu a few years ago. They all went back to the mountains to practice. Otherwise, they wouldn't have turned into what they are now." My mother couldn't help but ask her grandmother, "Mom, what should we do?" Grandma sighed again and said, "What else can we do? If not, we can just follow that person's instructions tomorrow and lower our head. Immortal level 1 can crush us. We can't really let him demolish our immortal hull, can we? After hearing these words, our whole family stopped talking. For a moment, the house became gloomy and gloomy. In the end, Grandma invited the Bai family immortal herself and treated the wound on her leg, so there was no major problem. However, that night I tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. My mind was filled with Grandma's sighs and sighs. Slightly, I feel like I should do something for my grandmother and this family. Early the next morning, the village began to boil. It is said that there is an old man standing at the entrance of the village, naming and asking his grandmother to bow and kowtow 3 times and invite him into the village. The people in the village didn't know about the fight against immortals last night, so they didn't know who that old man was. However, in their eyes, Grandma is definitely a semi-immortal, and how could she be so humble as to invite such an old man? But what surprised everyone was that Grandma really went. Although treated by the Bai family immortal, Grandma's leg injury has improved significantly. However, it still walks with a limp. My parents, one on the left and one on the right, helped my grandmother to reach the village entrance amidst the gaze of the whole village. And I followed my grandfather closely behind. When he saw his grandmother coming, the old man showed a proud smile and nodded at her, not bad, and he really kept her promise. She really came over. Grandma didn't say a word, but my dad spoke first and said, "What kind of thing are you? How dare my mom bow and kowtow to you 3 times? If you dare to make things difficult for her today, I'll chop you alive. If you don't believe me, give it a try." After listening to my father's words, the old man not only didn't get angry, but also smiled and said to his grandmother, "What did you say, Auntie? Are you really planning to destroy your entire immortal hull for the sake of face?" Upon hearing these words, Grandma hesitated. Seeing my grandmother not speaking, my dad opened his mouth but was stopped by her. She sighed, as if she had made up her mind, and nodded at the old man, saying, "Forget it, I'm willing to admit defeat. I've lost, what else can I say? I can't let my immortal suffer with me." As she spoke, she was about to let go of my mother's hand and kneel down for the old man in front of her. "I can't stand it anymore." A few steps rushed out, grabbed Grandma's hand, and loudly said to her, "Grandma, don't be afraid. And I'm here, I see who dares to bully you." Upon hearing my words, the old man couldn't help but burst into laughter. He said to me, "You're an interesting little doll. But you really can't handle this today. What can't be controlled, isn't it just fighting immortals? I'll fight you." I gritted my teeth and said. Upon hearing this, the old man seemed to have heard some particularly funny joke, and even burst into tears. It took me a long time to calm down, and I said to my grandmother, "Your little grandson is really interesting. He wants to fight against me for immortality. Does he know what fighting immortality is? It's so funny of me." I ignored the other person's ridicule and looked up and shouted, "Third uncle, someone is bullying me. Come on." As soon as these words were spoken, not only my family members, but even the whole village who were watching the excitement were stunned. Everyone knows that my father's generation was an only child, and where did I get my third uncle? What does it mean when I suddenly shout out so loudly? However, what was unexpected was that as soon as I uttered this sentence, a loud voice exploded in my ear. "Who is it that dares to bully my little boy?" As soon as I finished speaking, a burly man over 2 meters tall with a beard all over his face appeared beside me. And besides me, my grandmother, and the old man across from me, no one can see this strong man at all. Seeing the strong man appear, the old man's face is also full of shock. First, he stared at the strong man and then turned his gaze to me, looking incredulous. Obviously, I didn't expect that at just a few years old, I really have the protection of the immortal family. Grandma had never seen the strong man in front of her before, so she couldn't help but ask, "I don't know which immortal family you are from." The strong man glanced at his grandmother and laughed, saying, "Madam, you are so forgetful. I am the leader of the 70.2 Guiding Immortals, Lu Santai." Chapter 6. Sealing Immortals. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Upon hearing this name, my grandmother also woke up like a dream, remembering the other person's identity. I just didn't expect him to appear here in this situation. What's even more unexpected is that I would call him Uncle San. The old man looked at Lu Santai in front of him, his face uncertain. However, he was not willing to admit defeat in his demeanor. He said coldly to Lu Santai, "Do you think you, just a little willow fairy, can stand out for them?" As soon as I finished speaking, I saw a black-faced man appear next to the old man. This should be the wild fairy that Grandma mentioned before. The black-faced man first looked at Lu Santai, with a hint of fear on his face. However, he still stood there, seeming to have a fighting attitude. Lu Santai only glanced at the black-faced man and didn't take him to heart at all. He just said lightly, "I'm enough to deal with you all alone. However, you bullied my little boy. Everyone should come out and argue with you." At this point, Lu Santai paused for a moment and then spoke again, "You all come out." As soon as I finished speaking, all 70.2 Guiding Immortals appeared around me at the same time. There are those standing by my side, those surrounding the old man and the black-faced man to prevent them from escaping, and some floating in the air without a place to stand. In short, this moment scared the old man a lot. In his opinion, it is rare for a little doll who is a few years old to have a fairy family protector, but he did not expect so many fairy families to appear this time, which made his face start to change quickly. At this moment, a graceful woman wearing a qipao slowly walked out. I know this woman, she belongs to the Fox Fairy sect and is called Fox Meyer. Just as he walked out, he said coldly to the black-faced man, "I thought he was a big deal. He turned out to be a little wolf cub. Well, don't say that we bullied you because we have too many people. Now I give you a choice. As long as you leave immediately and promise that you have no connection with this person in the future, and don't be their immortal in the hall, we won't make things difficult for you. This person must learn a lesson today, you can handle it yourself." After hearing these words, the old man said angrily, "Are you planning to cut off my fairy?" The fox girl sneered twice, "It's still light to cut off your fairy. As long as our little boy is willing, it's not impossible to kill you." Upon hearing these words from Hume, the old man finally showed a frightened expression. However, the black-faced man never intended to leave, still standing by the old man's side. "It seems like I'm planning to live or die with the old man." Seeing this, Meyer called out, "Third brother." Lu Santai walked out and asked me, "Xiao Yu, come on, what are you planning to do?" I looked at the black-faced man and said coldly, "Beat him up first, so that he won't be able to appear again for at least 10 years. Lu Santai agreed and grabbed the black-faced man with more than 10 immortal families before leaving. "What about this old man?" Meyer asked. I looked at my grandmother and said again, "He injured one of her legs, so I'll give it back to him twice as much. Can you help me break both of his legs? Then throw them out of the village." After hearing my words, the old man widened his eyes in fear. Before he could speak, 2 immortal families had already walked over and kicked each of them on his knee. I only heard 2 crisp sounds of bones breaking, and the old man's 2 leg bones were kicked and broken like this. The whole person let out a mournful cry and collapsed on the ground. The 2 immortal families couldn't help but say that they lifted the old man and threw him out of the village. The people around who were watching the commotion had no idea what was happening, they just saw that the old man and I had only spoken a few words, and his legs broke, and he was thrown out like this. Everyone looked at me in surprise, their eyes filled with fear. I vented my anger on my grandmother, and my mood improved a lot. However, Grandma was somewhat worried. She didn't say much, just took my hand and left with me. After returning home, my grandmother didn't say a word. She just poured a bowl of water from the immortal hall and said to me, "Xiao Yu, you should drink this first." I didn't think much, so I took the water glass and drank it. After drinking a glass of water, I started to feel drowsy and fell asleep in no time. However, I couldn't sleep soundly and always felt like someone was talking in my ear. I tried hard to open my eyes, but I couldn't do it no matter what. But in my ear, I heard my grandmother's voice. Dear Immortal families, my grandson is still young and unpredictable. He has no idea whether what he is doing is good or bad. You have seen this today, and if you develop a liking for it in the future, you may become proud of it. It will not only cause great trouble for yourself, but also affect the moral integrity of all immortal families. The voice of whom Meyer came out. The old lady's words make sense, but I don't know what you plan to do next. Grandma pondered for a moment before speaking again. If the immortal families don't mind, I want to temporarily seal his immortal relationship. Wait until he truly understands what to do and what not to do, and really needs your help to unlock this seal. I don't know what the immortal families think. As soon as my grandmother finished speaking, a chaotic sound came from my ear. It seems like there is a group of people whispering in my ear. Finally, Lu Santai's voice came out. Mr. Huang, what do you think of this matter? A middle-aged man's voice came out. There's nothing wrong with doing this. However, my little boy has a weak physique and is prone to accidents. Madam, you must ask your old fairy to take care of him. If anything happens to my little boy, I won't say anything about the rest. You should also be clear. We can do the same thing that the wild fairy can do. The other party's tone clearly carries a hint of threat. Grandma sighed and said, "Don't worry, this is also my own grandson. Can I still put him in danger?" Mr. Huang's voice came out again. Since that's the case, let's each go back to the mountains to practice. After 15 years, we'll come back together again. As soon as the words fell, the whole room fell silent, and only the sighs of Grandma could be heard. Then, I fell into a coma and didn't know anything. Since then, I have never seen the figures of Lu Santai and Hu Meyer again. Maybe they really went back to the mountain for cultivation. And my life has since become like a normal person. As time passed, my memories of Lu Santai and his companions gradually became blurred. In the end, it was even forgotten in my mind. However, when I was 22 years old, an accident awakened that dusty memory, along with the 72 guiding immortals. Chapter 7. A Pair of Bloody Eyes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. My name is Han Feiyu, and I am 22 years old. I am studying at a university in Yuecheng. In my rural hometown, as a college student, I am undoubtedly a golden phoenix flying out of a chicken coop, receiving the envious gaze of everyone in the village. However, when I truly arrived here, I realized that there were countless college students in big cities, and employment has truly become a very difficult problem. In order to provide for food and clothing without always asking for money from my family, I became a private tutor in my spare time through my friend Lao Fei's relationship. As a result, it provoked something that should not have been provoked. The male owner of the house I went to has the surname Meng, and the female has the surname Zhou. They are all office workers who earn their living expenses by working for others. My child Meng Liang is a third-year student in junior high school, which is a time of academic stress. On my first day here, the man told me not to meddle in anything I saw or heard at their house. The most important thing is that you cannot enter the room inside no matter what. As he spoke these last words, a hint of ferocity appeared on the man's face. It makes me feel a bit scary. Vaguely, I feel that there seems to be not only the three of them in this family, but also something unknown that cannot be said to have debuted. He was a little better off, but when I heard him mention the inner room, I instinctively lifted my head and glanced at the door. That is an ordinary door that cannot be more ordinary. There doesn't seem to be any abnormality from the outside. However, it was tightly closed, as if not wanting anything to come out. What caught my attention even more was a palm-sized black paper directly above that door. It is covered in dense blood-red handwriting. I grew up under the influence of my grandmother since I was young, and naturally understood that this is a talisman. However, I am not sure what it is used for. I can only vaguely feel that this talisman should be used to suppress something. That is to say, there must be some undisclosed secrets inside this house. However, for my first living expenses, I still agreed. In the next few days, I will come over every night at around 8 p.m. to help Meng Liang with his homework. You must rush back to the school dormitory before 10 o'clock. Everything was originally safe and sound, but one night, something happened. That night, Meng Liang's parents called back and said they were working overtime and would come back later. I didn't care either, I just continued to help Meng Liang with his homework. And at that moment, suddenly, a crisp sound came from their house, as if something had fallen to the ground and been shattered. The sudden sound startled both Meng Liang and me. Look at me and I'll look at you, both of us. We're not sure what's going on. Now Meng Liang's parents are not at home, there are only the two of us in the whole family. So, who would have made that sound? After hesitating for a moment, I said to Meng Liang, perhaps it was the wind blowing, or maybe it was something that wasn't properly placed and fell down on its own. There's nothing to be alarmed about. After listening to my words, Meng Liang opened his mouth with a hesitant expression, but in the end, he still didn't say anything. Lower your head and continue reading. Looking at Meng Liang's appearance, I am a bit curious. Do you mean he knows something? Just as neither of us was speaking, suddenly there was a loud bang. It's like a table or some other large furniture collapsing. This time, I finally can't sit still. It is obvious that this is not as simple as the wind blowing. It's more like someone or something hiding in this room and throwing things. I turned my head and glanced at Meng Liang. At this moment, he had already begun to tremble all over, and his face had turned pale. The body involuntarily retreated towards the back. It's like encountering something extremely terrifying. I didn't speak, I just quietly took out a kitchen knife. If there is a thief in this room, I also have something to defend myself against. If it's something else I didn't dare to think anymore, so I slowly approached the door. And the things inside the door seemed to know my existence and vigilance, and suddenly became quiet. The sudden silence caught me off guard. I turned my head to look at Meng Liang, but I didn't know what he was afraid of. Anyway, at this moment, he was curled up in a ball, trembling and afraid to make any movements. I was just about to ask him what was going on when suddenly I heard a series of bangs, coming from behind. I instinctively turned my head and saw that with every sound, the door in front of me would shake violently. It's like something inside wants to break open this door and come out from inside. Saying not to be afraid at this time is false. I also wish I could leave here right away. But my damn curiosity was so strong that I unconsciously began to approach that door bit by bit. And when I stood in front of that door, it once again became quiet. I gently pressed my ear against the door, wanting to hear the commotion inside. But I didn't hear anything. On the contrary, I found that this door was surprisingly cold, as if what was in front of me was not a door, but a huge block of ice. I took a deep breath and slowly placed my hand on the door handle. In just this moment of effort, my mind has been tossing and turning several times, wondering whether or not to open this door. However, at that time, I felt as if I had been captivated and still unconsciously twisted the door handle. With just a click, the door lock was opened. I was startled as if I had just woken up from a dream. I wanted to take my hand back from the door handle, but accidentally opened a gap in the door. As the door was opened, I immediately felt a cold and piercing wind blowing out from inside the door. This made me shiver uncontrollably. However, at the same time, I also saw that inside this door, it was pitch black and I couldn't see anything. The lights in the living room seemed to be blocked by something and cannot shine in at all. The room in front of me feels like a gateway to the underworld, giving people a sense of fear. And at that moment, a pair of eyes suddenly appeared in front of me. I only have one pair of eyes, and I can't see anything else. And these eyes are also staring at me with their blood-red pupils, staring straight at me. Chapter 8. Not to be provoked. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing these eyes in front of me, I was frightened and let out a scream. But before I could react, I felt a sudden surge of force from the door in front of me, which knocked me out completely. Immediately after, my eyes darkened and I lost consciousness. I don't know how long I've slept, but in my dreams, I can always feel a pair of blood-red eyes staring at me all the time. It's like a hungry and thirsty beast waiting for the moment when its prey unlocks its defenses. When I woke up again, it was already shining brightly. I am not at Meng Liang's house either, but I have been admitted to the hospital instead. Lao Fei's plump body stood in front of me. Seeing me wake up, Old Fat asked me, "How are you? Are you okay?" I rubbed my slightly sore neck and asked, "Why am I here?" Lao Fei explained, "It was Meng Liang's parents who sent you two to the hospital. They said it was gas poisoning. Fortunately, it wasn't serious, so there was nothing wrong." I simply agreed and immediately thought about the eyes behind their house. Immediately after, my head went dizzy, and I became drowsy. At the same time, I could hear bursts of cold laughter in my ears. I was shocked in my heart. It seems that I have really provoked something powerful this time. If this continues, I'm afraid I'll have an accident. Thinking of this, I quickly said to Lao Fei, "Lao Fei, hurry to send me back to my hometown." Just as I finished speaking this sentence, I couldn't say a single word. For my situation, Lao Fei is very clear about it. He knew about my grandmother, and when he saw me now, he immediately understood what was going on. So, without thinking about it, he processed my discharge procedures and took me by taxi to leave the hospital. In fact, I saw everything that Lao Fei had done in his eyes, but his head was unusually heavy, as if he could sleep off at any time when he was extremely tired. However, I have been maintaining this state and cannot sleep at all. In the car, I could feel Old Fat talking to his grandmother on the phone, but as for what they said, I listened vaguely. Even, I can feel what I said to Old Fat. So, after all the twists and turns, the two of us finally returned home. I don't know if it's due to psychological reasons, but I just felt like I had just stepped into my grandmother's yard, and my whole body immediately became much clearer. Although my head is still a bit heavy, it's not as serious as before. My grandmother pulled me into the room, and I sat by the Kong without saying a word. As I watched my grandmother put 3 incense sticks on the immortal hall, I sneered inwardly, "Old lady, do you think these few of you in your family can hold me down?" Upon hearing this, my grandmother turned her head to me and asked, "What exactly are you? Why are you clinging to my grandson's body? There are rules in every line, and if you want to suppress me like a fairy, it's hard to justify it." After hearing these words, I burst out laughing and jumped up to the front of the immortal hall. I pointed at the immortal hall and loudly said, "I'll crush them, so what can I do? If you have the ability, you can let them come down. They count one by one. Who can move me?" As I spoke, I rushed over and grabbed the altar with both hands, intending to flip it over like this. Still Old Fat with quick eyes and quick hands, he rushed over and hugged me, trying to pull me back. But at this moment, my strength was particularly strong, and I even started to tear myself apart from Old Fat. At this moment, suddenly, the incense burner that was originally placed on the immortal hall exploded with a loud bang, soaring up a sky full of incense ash. And I seemed to see several figures falling from the immortal hall inside the incense ash. One by one, they grabbed my clothes and pulled my hair back. A few times later, a woman in red suddenly pulled out of my body. Just took her into the immortal hall and disappeared. And my whole body has finally returned to normal. Grandma didn't see the scene just now and quickly came over to ask me if there was anything wrong. I just told my grandmother what I saw earlier. After listening to me, my grandmother's face also showed an indescribable expression. It seemed like a sigh of relief, but there was also an obvious concern. However, since I'm okay, my grandmother is still very happy. That evening, Grandma didn't let us go back, but instead cooked a table of food and entertained Old Fat. If it weren't for him bringing me back this time, no one could have said what would have happened to me. Rural people go to bed early, and coupled with me and Lao Fei accompanying my father, my grandfather drank alcohol, so he fell asleep early. Maybe I drank too much alcohol, and in the middle of the night, I was choked up by the urge to urinate, so I went out to make things easier. And when I came back, I saw my grandmother walking out of the room. I thought she was just like me. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I planned to talk to her, but at that moment, I found my grandmother with a blank face, as if she hadn't seen me at all, limping past me. This is absolutely abnormal. I quickly caught up and grabbed Grandma's hand from behind, shouting, "Grandma, what's wrong with you?" After listening to my words, my grandmother's body stopped, her shoulders began to move continuously, and her breathing became rapid. It's like sobbing softly. But why does Grandma cry in the middle of the night? Did you argue with your grandfather? This is impossible. Since I became sensible, my grandfather has been giving way to my grandmother everywhere, not to mention making her angry. He has never even fought back or scolded her. So, Grandma, what's going on? Just as I was lost in thought, my grandmother finally slowly turned around and looked at me. When I saw my grandmother clearly at this moment, my head suddenly hummed. Grandma's appearance is still the same as before, nothing special. But his eyes turned blood red at this moment, so red that they could almost drip blood. This unconsciously reminds me of the bloody eyes I saw in Meng Liang's house before. Seeing this, I can't help but feel my scalp tingling. Can it be said that something from Meng Liang's house ran into his grandmother's body? Can't even the guardian fairy in Grandma's family be able to control each other? Just when I was extremely frightened, my grandmother in front of me actually grinned at me. That laughter made a layer of goosebumps all over my body. After laughing for a while, Grandma finally spoke up. She said to me in a gloomy tone, "Kid, only one of you can live tonight." Chapter 9. Someone behind the scenes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Grandma's tone of voice at this moment is very strange, with a feeling of storytelling. I frowned and asked her again, "Who the hell are you?" Upon hearing my question, my grandmother sneered twice and said, "What's wrong? You released me and asked me who I was. I was planning to take you away tonight, but your grandmother begged me hard to let you go. She was willing to use her own life to replace me, so I came to take her away." After saying these words, my grandmother ignored me and turned around and walked towards the outside. In this situation, how could I let her just leave like this? He quickly grabbed her wrist and shouted into the room, "Dad, Fat, come out quickly." The night in the countryside is very quiet, so much so that my voice not only calls out the people at home, but also wakes up the neighbors around me. Quickly, the people at home ran out of the room, and after seeing me arguing with my grandmother, they all didn't know what was going on. I grabbed my grandmother's hand and explained the general situation to them. My dad and Lao Fei finally realized and rushed forward with me to control my grandmother. At this point, many neighbors had already walked out of their homes and surrounded our yard. With this person, our courage has increased significantly. Grandma doesn't care about these things at all, just yelling and yelling endlessly there. My mother looked at my father with some concern and said, "Our mother usually has an old immortal to protect her body. Why did something else get on her body this time? What should we do?" When I heard my mother say that, I had a sudden idea. Hurriedly ran into the room and came to the front of the immortal hall. I lit 3 incense sticks, respectfully bowed 3 times, and briefly explained my grandmother's situation, hoping that the immortals could help. However, what I never expected was that the 3 incense sticks in my hand could not be inserted into the incense burner no matter what. As long as it's just put in, those 3 incense sticks will fall down and won't stand up at all. This has happened several times in a row. Finally, I couldn't help but hold on to it like this with my hands. I thought to myself, this is not likely to collapse. However, I heard a soft hiss sound, and those 3 incense sticks went out like this. Seeing this, I am really in a hurry. Now my grandmother's situation is critical, but her old immortal refuses to eat incense. This is clearly not intended to interfere with this matter. What should we do? Seeing our family like this, the neighbors around also began to help find ways. Finally, a person I should have called second uncle suddenly spoke up and said, "It's really not possible. You can go find Xian barefoot and see. Maybe he can come up with something." Upon hearing this, everyone else agreed. Chen Qijiao is a barefoot doctor in our village. Usually, people like to call him that way, and no one will call his name after a while. It is rumored that when Chen Barefoot was young, he traveled extensively and also learned various skills. Specializes in treating various difficult and complicated diseases. I also know some things about being entangled and bumping into customers. Just because he is low-key, and coupled with his grandmother's reputation in the surrounding areas, almost everyone is about to forget that he is also an expert in this field. Upon hearing this, my dad's eyes lit up and he lifted his foot to go out and find Chen Qijiao. But it was stopped by me. I told him that his grandmother's situation is special now, and he must stay at home with his grandfather to take care of her. I will go find Chen Qijiao to come over. My dad didn't say much and just nodded in agreement. I lifted my foot and walked out, and Old Fat quickly followed me from behind. With the company of Old Fat, I wouldn't be too nervous either. The two of us ran wildly all the way, surrounded by our chaotic footsteps. As I ran, I felt something was not quite right. Even though Lao Fei and I are running fast now, there are only the two of us here. But why do I feel like there are inexplicable footsteps running with us around me? Lao Fei seemed to have noticed this issue, and his face was also filled with a frightened expression. He wanted to turn his head and take a look. But it was stopped by me. Don't turn back. No matter what you hear in the middle of the night, try not to turn back. Have you never heard of 3 young fires on a person's head and shoulders? With these 3 young fires, those things dare not do anything to us. However, if we turn back and accidentally extinguish one young fire, the other party will have an opportunity to take advantage of it. Upon hearing what I said, the frightened expression on Old Fat's face became even stronger. He couldn't help but ask me, "So what should we do now?" "Keep moving forward, don't pay attention to that sound. Let's wait until the man arrives at Chen Qijiao's house." The two of us stopped talking and quickened our steps towards Chen Barefoot's house. However, the footsteps behind us became increasingly rapid and closer to us. Old Fat and I became increasingly anxious in our hearts, and in the end, we didn't care about anything and ran wildly all the way. The two of us run fast, and the footsteps behind us are even faster. In just a little while, it was already behind us. I can even feel a piercing chill coming from behind me. Just as I was about to lose control of my fear and turn around to take a look, the two of us finally arrived at the entrance of Chen Qijiao. Almost at the same time, a furious shout came from inside Chen Barefoot and his family's house. "What kind of thing dares to run to my doorstep and cause trouble? Get out of here!" Suddenly hearing such a loud shout, Old Fat and I were both stunned and completely unaware of what was going on. However, with this loud shout, the chill and footsteps behind us all disappeared. Lao Fei and I are in an awkward situation now. After all, the other party just shouted, "Get lost," and we don't know who they were shouting at. At this moment, I heard a faint sound coming from inside Chen Barefoot's house. Immediately after, the lights inside the room lit up, and then a middle-aged man in his 40s walked out wearing a coat. Although this person is only in his 40s, his face is already covered with deep wrinkles. It can be seen that I have experienced too many things in the first half of my life. He opened the door and looked at me and Lao Fei. Finally, I turned my gaze to me and said, "Are you the grandson of Aunt He?" I nodded and said, "That's right, Uncle Chen. My grandmother has had an accident. Could you please come with me?" After listening to my words, Chen Qijiao didn't move, but asked me, "What happened to Aunt He? Grandma seems to be entangled by something." Upon hearing this, Chen Qijiao's face suddenly changed and he said, "What are you talking about? He Ergu has been entangled by something." Chapter 10. The more trouble, the more fierce. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I explained the situation to Chen Qijiao in a few words. And his face became increasingly ugly. "Even Aunt He has been entangled, it seems like this thing is not easy," murmured the speaker. He asked us to wait for a moment, went in alone to tidy up, and then walked out with a small leather bag. I dare not delay here too much, so I quickly led the way with Lao Fei. With Chen Qijiao following behind, my and Lao Fei's hearts have truly become more grounded. And this time, the sound of footsteps never appeared again. Just as we reached the empty space in the center of the village, a strong wind blew over. All the leaves and branches of a large poplar tree beside me began to shake non-stop. There was a popping sound. I heard my grandmother say that this big leaf poplar, also known as clapping hands, belongs to the shade wood. There is an old saying that goes, "Do not plant mulberry in the front, do not plant willows in the back, and do not plant clapping hands in the courtyard." The term clapping hands here refers to the large-leaved poplar. This type of tree has relatively large and lush leaves. When the wind blows, it will collide with each other, making a popping sound, as if there is really someone invisible clapping their hands. Moreover, the large-leaved poplar has a relatively large body size and can cover a large area with lush branches and leaves, making it impossible for sunlight to shine year-round. In one go, two go, a dark place formed. Some evil creatures like to survive in such places, so they naturally attract some unclean things. Even in a scientific way, it can be explained. Planting such a large poplar tree in the courtyard blocks a large area of sunlight, making the house dim. When there is no wind, it is better. Once there is a wind blowing and grass swaying, the branches will give people a feeling of eerie shadows. Both psychology and spirit will be affected to a certain extent. But the big leaf poplar in front of us is somewhat eerie. The gust of wind just flashed by. But at this moment, it is still shaking non-stop. It's all about buying a windless automatic. Seeing this situation, I turned my head and glanced at Chen Barefoot. He is now staring at this big leaf poplar with a serious expression. Old Fat has an impulsive personality. As he cursed, he said, "Damn it, why is it so bad tonight? I was chased by footsteps just now, and now even this tree is planning to come and scare us. Are you really scared when you think you're fat?" As he spoke, he picked up a stone from the ground and threw it at the big leaf poplar in front of him. With a loud bang, the stone hit the tree trunk hard. A shocking scene occurred that shocked us. As the stone fell, a large piece of bark fell from the tree trunk. Almost at the same time, black and red liquid began to flow out from the gap. It's like human blood. Seeing this scene, Lao Fei was completely stunned. It took us a long time to stutter and ask, "What's going on here? Brother, is your village a bit too evil? The trees have all turned into spirits." I ignored his nonsense and turned my head to ask Chen Barefoot, "Uncle Chen, look at this matter." Chen Barefoot waved his hand before slowly saying, "I don't know what your family has provoked this time. It's surprising that the evil sect has reached such a level. However, rest assured that all of this is just a warning from it, asking me not to meddle in my business. But this time, what's wrong with He Ergu? How could I just sit idly by?" Speaking of which, he turned around with me and Lao Fei and walked towards my house. Seeing us leave, the big leaf yang behind swayed even more vigorously. It seems that I feel angry about Chen Barefoot's choice. Quickly, the three of us returned home. As before, the courtyard was surrounded by villagers watching the excitement. Seeing me back, they quickly made way for us. I didn't say much and walked straight in with Chen Barefoot. Just as I walked into the yard, I saw that my dad and his team had already tied my grandmother to a big tree. Grandpa sat silently smoking a dry cigarette, his face at a loss. Seeing that I had brought Chen Barefoot back, my parents quickly welcomed me and begged Chen Barefoot to save my grandmother no matter what. Chen Qijiao could only keep nodding in agreement. At this moment, the grandmother beside her suddenly sneered and said to Chen Qijiao, "You ignorant thing. I just gave you a little eye photo, hoping to make you understand the difficulties and retreat, but you insisted on coming here to die. Alright, when I kill this old lady, I'll go find you." Speaking of which, Grandma paused for a moment. Then he lifted his head and scanned all of our faces, saying in a cold voice, "None of you can run away." After listening to Grandma's words, all of us unconsciously felt a chill from behind. Some timid villagers have even begun to quietly retreat from the courtyard. Chen Qijiao ignored his grandmother's threat and instead said to my dad, "Big brother, could you please help me hold down He Ergu? I need to give her a few injections." Upon hearing this, my dad walked up with me and Lao Fei without saying a word, ready to hold down my grandmother. But now, my grandmother is very strong and struggling fiercely. Even the hemp rope that bound her was almost broken by her. Later on, a few people in the village who were closer to our house couldn't bear to watch anymore and all stood up to help. It was only then that they could barely control their grandmother. Seeing his grandmother motionless, Chen Qijiao didn't say much. He opened his small leather bag and took out a ball of yellow cloth, carefully opening it. Immediately, I saw 6 silver needles that were 1 finger long and shiny all over wrapped in the yellow cloth. Seeing this silver needle, I couldn't help but be stunned. Is the needle he just mentioned referring to this type of needle? Will piercing such a long needle kill someone? I looked at my dad and grandpa in the blink of an eye. And at this moment, both of them showed a worried expression, obviously thinking of going with me. Chen Qijiao was silent and didn't explain much. He came to his grandmother with a silver needle in his hand. Before we could stop him, he had already struck a lightning bolt and inserted a silver needle into her heavenly cover. Just for a moment, Grandma was nailed to the spot. The mouth is wide open, but it can only make a cough sound. Seeing this, Grandpa was the first to lose his composure and grabbed Chen Barefoot's hand, asking, "Xiao Chen, will she be in danger if you do this?" Chen Barefoot shook his head and said, "Don't worry, these injections are only targeted at the thing on He Ergu's body, and there is no harm to her body." After saying these words, he once again inserted a silver needle into the wet nurse's head. In this way, he inserted 6 silver needles in a row, and with each needle, his grandmother's body would shake violently. However, what made us feel strange was that the silver needle with a long finger inserted into Grandma's head did not shed any blood. On the contrary, Grandma's blood-red eyes are constantly flowing black blood out at this moment. Quickly, Grandma's eyes returned to their normal expression and her mind also recovered. However, upon seeing us for the first time, I couldn't help but sob and say, "You don't need to worry, I'm no longer capable. You better prepare for me as soon as possible. I can't avoid it this time."